The snow fell relentlessly over the Ardennes forest, covering the ground with a white blanket and silencing the sounds of war. Ethan Riley, a 25-year-old lieutenant with a face hardened by battle, clutched his rifle to his body, trying in vain to shield himself from the cold that gnawed at his bones. His team, consisting of only 5 men, was exhausted and starving. They were the only survivors of a mission that had gone terribly wrong. The bridge they were supposed to destroy still stood, and now they were surrounded by Nazi patrols, with no communication with Allied lines. "Riley, what do we do now?" whispered Sergeant Miller, an older and more experienced man whose tired features reflected everyone's despair. His stubbled beard was covered in small ice crystals, and his helmet seemed like a crushing weight on his shoulders. "We move forward, Sergeant," Ethan replied, his voice low but firm, his breath forming small clouds of vapor in the frigid air. "We can't stay here. If the patrols find us, we're done." They moved stealthily between the tree trunks, which looked like ghostly skeletons in the darkness. The ground, covered with snow and frozen leaves, crunched with every step, a loud and dangerous sound. The cold was a constant enemy, robbing them of their energy and will to live. Their boots were soaked and their socks frozen, causing a searing pain in their feet. The physical pain was the only thing that kept them alert, a constant reminder that they were still alive. Suddenly, the sound of snapping twigs made everyone duck down. A pair of young, frightened eyes watched them from the middle of the forest. It was a girl, no older than 17, with a worn coat and a wool hat that barely hid her brown hair. She looked as scared as they were, but her gaze was courageous. She motioned with her hand, calling them to follow her. The soldiers hesitated. It could be a trap. "Be careful. She might be a spy," Miller whispered, his hand on the barrel of his rifle. "Lieutenant, it's too risky to trust a stranger." Ethan looked at the girl. Her eyes, despite the fear, had a spark of determination. He felt he could trust her. After all, they didn't have many options. They were lost, surrounded, and running out of supplies. Following her seemed to be their only chance of survival. "She might be our only hope," Ethan said, making the decision. "Let's go, but stay on high alert. If she tries anything, we take her out." The girl smiled slightly, relieved, and started to walk. They followed her, rifles aimed, the tension in the air palpable. She guided them along a winding path, through bushes and trees, keeping them away from the main road where Nazi patrols usually passed. They walked for hours, the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. The beauty of the landscape contrasted with the imminent danger. The girl stopped in a clearing and turned to them. She took a deep breath, her breath forming a white cloud. "My name is Elodie," she said in English, with a strong French accent. "I'm from the Resistance." She looked at the exhausted and dirty soldiers. "And I know where the mines are. To not miss any chapter of this thrilling story, subscribe to the channel right now." Ethan, Miller, and the others exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and skepticism on their faces. The news that a minefield was ahead of them was terrifying, but the fact that Elodie knew where it was gave them an unexpected hope. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. "Where is it?" Elodie pointed to the west, to an area of the forest that looked identical to any other. "It's between this clearing and the main road. The Germans built it weeks ago to protect their supply area. I saw them do it. I wrote down the mine layout on a map." She pulled a crumpled, dirty piece of paper from her pocket. The map was simple, handmade, with small X's marking the places where the mines were buried. It was an impressive piece of work, done with precision and care, showing Elodie's dedication to the cause. "The Nazis planted anti-personnel and anti-tank mines," she explained, her voice grave. "We'll have to be extremely careful. One wrong step and the mission is over." Elodie's confidence was impressive, but Miller's hesitation was evident. "Lieutenant, she's a kid." he whispered to Ethan. "We can't trust our lives to her. It's crazy." Ethan looked at Elodie, who seemed perfectly calm while they argued. "She has already saved us from the patrol sergeant," he said, his eyes not leaving Elodie's. "We have no other choice. If she's telling the truth, she is our only way out. We have to take the risk." Miller sighed, defeated, and nodded. "As you wish, Lieutenant. But if something goes wrong, it's on you." Elodie heard the whole conversation, but her expression remained unchanged. She understood their fear and distrust. They were hardened soldiers, trained to fight and trust only their comrades. She was an unknown variable, a young girl in the middle of a war zone. But she knew her knowledge was the only thing that could save them. "Follow me exactly," she said, her voice now firmer. "I'll lead. One wrong step, and we're all gone. Do not deviate from my path. Do not touch anything." She started walking slowly, with careful, measured steps. The soldiers followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. Each step was an act of faith, a test of trust in a girl they had just met. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of snow under their feet. The fear of stepping on a mine was a constant, suffocating presence, a ghost that walked with them. They walked for a long time, the tension becoming almost unbearable. The sun had already set, and the moonlight cast long, eerie shadows on the trees. Elodie suddenly stopped and turned to them. She pointed to a path in the distance. "We're almost there. The path from here is clear. From now on, you're on your own. My job is done." A sense of relief washed over them, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they still weren't safe. The real danger lay ahead, on the other side of the minefield, where the Nazi patrols were waiting. As Elodie turned to leave, Ethan took a step forward. "Wait. Where are you going? It's not safe for you to go back alone." Elodie shook her head. "My village is that way," she said, pointing to the east. "My family is there. I have to go back to them." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She was not a soldier. She was a girl trying to protect her home and her family, just like them. But her courage was on a par with that of any man he had ever met. "You can't go back through the minefield. It's too dangerous," Ethan insisted. Elodie smiled a little, a tired and sad smile. "I know a safer way. I've walked this path my whole life, Lieutenant. I know every rock, every tree. The Germans can't take that from me. My knowledge is my weapon." Ethan hesitated. He couldn't force her to stay, but he couldn't just let her go alone either. "Come with us," he said, a new tone in his voice. "We can take you with us until we find the Allied lines. It's safer." Elodie's gaze met his, and he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a reflection of the dilemma she was facing. Staying with them would mean leaving her family and her village behind. Going back would mean facing the patrols and the dangers of the forest alone. "I can't leave them," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "My brother and sister need me." Before Ethan could say anything else, a sudden sound echoed through the forest, the distant bark of German military dogs. Everyone froze, the blood running cold in their veins. The dogs were close, too close. The patrols must have found their trail. Panic set in. "They're coming," whispered Miller, his face pale. "We have to go now." Elodie looked at the path they had just crossed and then at the path ahead, which was now filled with the sound of the approaching dogs. Her decision was made. "Come with me," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I know a place where we can hide. It's an old cabin not far from here. We can wait for them to pass." Ethan didn't hesitate this time. He knew they couldn't outrun the dogs. Their best chance was to hide. "Let's go," he said, and they followed Elodie, who was now moving with a new urgency. She led them through a dense part of the forest, filled with thick bushes and branches that made it difficult to walk. The dogs' barks got closer, and they could hear the guttural shouts of the German soldiers. Finally, they reached a small clearing, and there it was, an old wooden cabin, almost completely covered by ivy and snow. It looked abandoned, almost like a ghost from another time. Elodie carefully opened the door, which creaked loudly, and they all quickly slipped inside. The cabin was small and dirty, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. A fireplace in the corner was cold, but it offered some shelter. They all huddled together, their rifles aimed at the door, waiting. The dogs' barks were now right outside the cabin. They could hear them sniffing at the door, scratching the wood. The tension was suffocating. A German soldier's voice rang out, "Here, Hans, they're here." Ethan looked at Elodie, her face pale in the faint moonlight coming through the windows. The trust between them, fragile until now, had just been forged in the fire of fear. They were in this together, and their survival now depended entirely on her. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the sound of the soldiers' breathing and the persistent scratching of the German dogs outside. Ethan could hear the Germans' voices, muffled but close. They were talking in German, and although he couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. They were searching for them, and they were very close. The pressure was suffocating, and the soldiers' hands were sweaty, their knuckles white as they gripped their rifles. Elodie, despite her fear, remained calm. She sat in a corner, her eyes closed, listening intently to the sounds outside. Her familiarity with the forest gave her an advantage that the American soldiers didn't have. She could distinguish the sound of the wind from the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird from the footstep of a soldier. After what seemed like an eternity, she opened her eyes. "They're moving away," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The dogs are losing our scent. We need to stay here until morning. They won't look for us in the dark. It's too risky for them." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Elodie," he whispered. "You saved us." Elodie just nodded, a small, tired smile on her face. "We are in this together now, Lieutenant." The night was long and cold. The soldiers huddled together, trying to share the little warmth they had. Ethan kept a watch at the window, a small cracked pane of glass that offered a limited view of the forest. The snow had stopped falling, and the moonlight illuminated the silent trees, creating a scene of sinister beauty. He thought about the mission, the failed attempt, and the friends he had lost. His mind wandered to his family back home, to his wife Sarah, and the promise he had made to her to return. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of the life he had left behind and the uncertainty of his future. The war had taken a toll on him, and he felt the weight of every lost life and every wrong decision. He looked at Elodie, sleeping peacefully in a corner, and a strange feeling of responsibility washed over him. She was not a soldier, she was a civilian. A girl who was doing everything she could to survive, and now her survival was in his hands, just as his was in hers. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange, Elodie woke up. She looked at Ethan, who was still at the window, and gave him a nod. "The Germans are gone," she said. "We can leave." They carefully left the cabin and walked into the freezing morning air. The forest was silent, and the snow was untouched, a beautiful, deadly landscape. Elodie led them again, this time to the east, away from the minefield and the German patrols. They walked for hours, their stomachs growling from hunger and their bodies shivering from the cold. They had almost no food left and very little water. Elodie noticed their distress and stopped by a small, frozen stream. She carefully broke the ice with a rock and filled a canteen. "We can drink this," she said. "It's clean water." Then she pulled a handful of berries from a bush. "And we can eat these, they're safe. My grandmother taught me which ones are poisonous and which ones aren't." The berries, though small, were a godsend. They gave them a little energy and helped them to continue walking. Elodie's knowledge of the forest and its resources was invaluable, and her presence was a source of comfort and hope. Ethan realized that she was not just a guide, but a crucial part of their team. They continued walking, the sun getting higher in the sky. Elodie pointed to a trail in the distance. "That's the path to the main road," she said. "If we follow it, we will find an old German checkpoint that is now abandoned. After that, it's a few hours of walking to the nearest French village. The villagers will help us." A new hope filled the hearts of the soldiers. They were almost there. But as they approached the trail, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A group of German soldiers was there, sitting around a bonfire, eating and talking. They were not patrols. They were a larger contingent, a part of a larger force, guarding the main road. The abandoned checkpoint was not abandoned at all. You are enjoying this, aren't you? So don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. The soldiers instinctively ducked down, hiding behind a thick bush. The sight of the German contingent was a gut punch. The hope they had just felt evaporated, replaced by a cold wave of fear and despair. The main road, their only way out, was now blocked. "What do we do now, Lieutenant?" Miller whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "We can't get past them. They'll see us for sure." Ethan looked at the German soldiers who were laughing and eating, completely unaware of the Americans hiding just a few hundred yards away. He knew Miller was right. A direct confrontation was out of the question. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Elodie, however, had an idea. "I know a different way," she said, her voice low but firm. "There's an old Roman road, a few miles from here, that goes around the checkpoint. It's overgrown and rarely used, but it's a way through." "A Roman road?" Ethan asked, a mix of skepticism and curiosity in his voice. "Are you sure it's safe?" "It's safer than going through them," Elodie replied, pointing to the German soldiers. "It's a longer path, but it will lead us to the same village. It's our only option." Ethan weighed his options. The risk of getting caught was high, but so was the risk of not doing anything. He decided to trust Elodie. She had already proven her worth, and her knowledge of the forest was unmatched. "All right," he said. "We follow Elodie. Let's go." They moved away from the main road, walking deeper into the forest. The Roman road was indeed overgrown, covered with thickets and thorny bushes. It was a difficult path, and they had to move slowly and carefully to avoid getting injured. The exhaustion was setting in again, and the lack of food was making them weaker with every passing hour. The weather worsened again. The sky, which had been clear in the morning, was now covered with dark, menacing clouds. It started to snow again, a soft, fine snow that quickly turned into a heavy downpour. The cold returned with a vengeance, biting at their skin and chilling them to the bone. They were soaked and shivering, their morale at an all-time low. They walked for what seemed like an eternity. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a labyrinth of trees and snow. The Roman road, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a prison. The silence was broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing and the steady rhythm of their footsteps in the snow. Suddenly a tripwire was triggered. It was a simple, almost invisible wire, and the sound of the explosion was deafening. It wasn't a mine, but a flare. The bright red light illuminated the forest, turning the dark landscape into a terrifying, otherworldly scene. A moment later, they heard the sound of dogs barking in the distance, and the voices of German soldiers shouting. They had been discovered. "Run!" Ethan yelled, and they all started to run, their fear giving them a new burst of energy. But the dogs were faster, and the German soldiers were closer than they thought. They were trapped, with the forest behind them and the Germans in front. The only way out was to fight. A brutal firefight erupted, the air filled with gunfire and the smell of smoke as the soldiers took cover and returned fire. Ethan, in the middle of it all, was a leader fighting for his men's survival. Elodie, though not a soldier, proved her worth by distracting a German aiming at Miller, allowing him to take down the enemy. But the battle took a turn for the worse when Johnson, one of the soldiers, was hit. Ethan rushed to help him, but as he did, he saw a German officer take aim at Elodie. He made a split-second decision. He pushed Johnson to safety and fired at the officer. The officer fell, but in that moment, another German soldier shot Ethan in the shoulder and he collapsed. Elodie, seeing her leader fall, knew what she had to do. With her heart sinking, she crawled to Ethan, realizing that with him down, she had to take charge. The Germans retreated, leaving the forest in a tense silence. Ethan lay wounded, his shoulder bleeding profusely. Elodie, with surprising strength, wrapped his wound and declared, "We have to move. They will be back." With the soldiers' morale shattered, they looked to Elodie, who was no longer just a guide, but their new leader. She led them away from the failed Roman road and deeper into the forest she called home. Despite their exhaustion and Ethan's pain, they pushed on, fueled by her confident steps. After hours of walking, she found a small, hidden cave. It was a perfect shelter from the cold and wind. Inside, the exhausted soldiers collapsed, finally safe for the night. Elodie covered Ethan with her coat and sat beside him, a silent guardian in the dark. For the first time in days, they felt a fragile sense of peace. They were a team, a family, and they weren't giving up. If you're as gripped by this story as we are, then subscribe now to our channel. We can't wait to see you for the next video. The next morning, Ethan's condition was dire. His fever was high, and his wound was infected. "He needs a doctor," Elodie said urgently. Miller, distraught, reminded her they couldn't carry him for miles. Elodie, however, remembered her grandmother's old stories. "There's a farm a few miles from here," she said, her voice firm. "An old resistance couple, John and Marie, live there. They can help." The soldiers, inspired by her conviction, built a makeshift stretcher from branches and belts. They began a slow, difficult trek, carrying Ethan through the rough terrain. The walk was a grueling test of their physical and emotional endurance, but they pushed on, strengthened by Elodie's stories of Jean and Marie's kindness. After hours of struggle, they finally saw it, a small farm with smoke rising from the chimney. The sight filled them with relief and hope. They had made it. Jean and Marie welcomed them warmly. Marie, with a gentle touch, immediately tended to Ethan's infected wound, and Jean provided a hot meal that the starving soldiers devoured. For the next few days, the farm was a haven. The soldiers helped with chores and felt a sense of normalcy they hadn't experienced in months. Elodie and a recovering Ethan spent hours talking, their conversations a bridge between two different worlds. They shared their lives, and their trust blossomed into a deep friendship. When Ethan was well enough, Jean gave them a map showing a safe route through the mountains to the Allied lines. With heavy hearts, they prepared to leave. Elodie, who would stay at the farm, hugged Ethan, a silent promise in her eyes. "You saved my life," Ethan told her. "I will never forget you." "We are a family now," she replied, a tear rolling down her cheek, "and we will always be a family." With a mix of sadness and hope, they left the farm, ready to face the final mountainous leg of their journey. The mountain journey was a test of their endurance, but they pushed on, bound by a shared determination. They were no longer just soldiers, they were a family forged in courage. Finally, in the distance, they saw the Allied flag, a sight that filled them with immense relief. They had made it home. After the war, Ethan returned to his wife Sarah in America. Yet, he never forgot Elodie. Their letters kept their bond alive, and a few years later he returned to France to see her. He found her at the farm, now a strong, independent woman living with her siblings. Their reunion was silent but emotional. Elodie, Sarah, and Ethan, from different worlds, found a connection rooted in their shared humanity. As the sun set, they stood together, a family born of war and forged by kindness. In that moment, Ethan knew he was truly home. Thank you for following this journey with us. To stay updated with our new and exciting content, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next video.